That word, never, didn't just echo. It detonated. Henry Grayson stood frozen in the pristine, sterile hospital room as the neurologist's voice delivered the blow. She may recover some upper body strength, the doctor said gently, but she'll never walk again. Time stopped. The heart monitor beeped steadily behind him. Machines hummed. Nurses passed by the glass doors. But Henry didn't hear any of it. All he heard was that one word, never. Henry Grayson was a man known for winning. A self-made tech billionaire. The kind of man whose name made stock prices shift. Whose calls got answered on the first ring. Whose ideas changed markets. He was powerful, calculating, unstoppable. But now, he was powerless. On the hospital bed lay his daughter, Lila, just 9 years old, looking smaller than ever beneath the white sheets. Her legs lay still, lifeless. Her once vibrant eyes, big and brown, stared off at the ceiling, as if trying to float above her broken body. In her arms, she clutched a teddy bear worn from years of love. Its left ear was stitched crudely from when she'd tried to sew it back after the dog chewed it. It was her favorite thing. And now, it was the only thing she held on to. The car accident had been swift and cruel. One moment, they were driving home from ballet practice, laughing about how she wanted to be a dancing scientist. The next, screeching tires, a blinding crash, shattered glass, blood, and silence. She had survived, but not without a cost. Henry did what any father with unlimited resources would do. He flew in specialists from Switzerland, Japan, and Germany. He hired the top spinal trauma experts. They filled his home with rehab equipment, brought in hydrotherapy pools, and ran countless tests and scans. Each time, the same verdict returned: permanent spinal cord damage. No signal from the brain to her lower limbs. The connection was gone. The bridge was broken. Some therapists sugarcoated it. Some were blunt. But the conclusion was always the same. She will never walk again. Lila didn't cry. Not once. That terrified Henry more than anything. She just stopped talking. Stopped hoping. Her little legs that once leapt across the living room to show off dance moves now just rested still under blankets. Henry tried to be strong. He told her she was still brilliant, still beautiful, still everything. But she only stared blankly at the window, watching raindrops race each other to the bottom. Weeks passed. The world outside his mansion kept moving. Earnings reports, investor meetings, press releases. But none of it mattered anymore. He'd built a tech empire from scratch, but couldn't fix his own daughter's legs. One gray afternoon, when the rain was falling so heavily it felt like the clouds themselves were crying, Henry took Lila for a walk. Or rather, a push. She sat bundled in her wheelchair, the hood of her coat barely shielding her from the drizzle. They moved down the crowded city sidewalks, Henry silent, Lila silent, the wheels of the chair squeaking slightly with each puddle. People passed by in a blur, umbrellas, suits, coffee cups, phone screens. The world kept spinning, unbothered by their heartbreak. Then, just as Henry turned the corner near an old market, he heard it. A voice. Small, raspy, but bold. "Sir, I can make your daughter walk again." Henry stopped. He turned his head, unsure if the words were even real. Maybe he imagined them. Maybe he was just losing it. There, crouched beside a broken crate in the rain, was a boy, barefoot, no older than 13, wearing a soaked, oversized hoodie that clung to his thin frame. His hair was messy, his hands covered in grime. He looked like he hadn't eaten a real meal in days. But his eyes, those eyes, were sharp, intelligent, like they'd seen more than a child ever should. "What did you just say?" Henry asked, stunned. The boy repeated without hesitation, this time clearer. "I said, I can make your daughter walk again." Henry blinked, unsure whether to be angry, amused, or just confused. This was ridiculous. A barefoot beggar kid claiming he could do what the world's best doctors couldn't? He looked down at Lila. Her head had tilted slightly, just enough to show interest for the first time in weeks. Henry narrowed his eyes at the boy. "Who are you?" The boy simply smiled. "Sir, I can make your daughter walk again." The words felt impossible, out of place, like someone whispering hope into a room filled with thunder. Henry turned sharply toward the voice. Standing just beyond the curb was a boy, barefoot, no more than 13, soaked from head to toe in rainwater. His oversized hoodie clung to his thin frame. His pants were torn, One leg rolled up above the ankle where a homemade brace peeked out, constructed from bottle caps and wire. He looked like a beggar, but his eyes told another story. "What did you just say?" Henry asked, blinking in disbelief. "I can help your daughter walk again," the boy repeated, slower this time. His voice was soft, almost too soft, but laced with a strange confidence that made it hard to ignore. Henry looked around, wondering if anyone else had heard. They hadn't. People just kept walking. No one paid attention to a soaked man pushing a wheelchair or a homeless kid talking nonsense in the rain. "You're a child," Henry said, his tone halfway between concern and irritation. "And homeless." The boy didn't flinch. "Yes, but I read. I watch. I learn from the windows of clinics I'm not allowed in. I fix broken things." Henry raised an eyebrow. "Broken things like what?" "Toys." The boy looked down briefly at the crude wooden cart he was pulling, its wheels wobbling, barely hanging on. "Everything," he said. "Toys. Bikes. Machines. Bones." Henry sighed. "Bones." He nearly laughed. "You're a street kid, and you're claiming you can do what neurologists, surgeons, and billion-dollar hospitals can't." "I don't claim," the boy said softly. "I build. I test. I observe. I've watched how nerves respond to pressure, how the spine sends weak signals even when injured. The body always tries to adapt if you guide it." The way he spoke wasn't childish. It wasn't even desperate. It was deliberate, like he actually understood what he was talking about. Still, Henry shook his head. "Look, kid, I appreciate the guts, but my daughter's condition isn't something duct tape and gears can fix. I know what spinal cord trauma is," the boy said, cutting in. "I know what Asia grade A means. I know she can't feel her legs. But I also know the brain is stubborn and smart." That made Henry pause. The kid wasn't quoting TV shows. He was quoting actual medical terms. "How do you even know about that?" Henry asked, suddenly more curious than annoyed. The boy looked up at the sky for a moment. Rain hit his face, but he didn't blink. "Sometimes," he said, "when you're not allowed inside the hospital, you sit outside long enough to hear everything through the vents." It was such a ridiculous image, yet somehow completely believable. Henry didn't know what to say. Then, from behind him, a voice spoke up for the first time in days. "Daddy, let's try." He turned. Lila. She had been silent for nearly 2 weeks, ever since the last therapy session failed. But now her head was tilted toward the boy. Her eyes weren't dull anymore. They were curious. "I want to try," she said again, firmer this time. Henry looked between his daughter and the boy. Everything in his logical brain screamed no. This was madness. It was dangerous, risky, but something in his heart, his tired, desperate heart, cracked open. This boy, for all his grime and tattered clothes, had just done what no doctor, no therapist, no billion-dollar facility could. He had made Lila believe again. Henry sighed deeply. "All right, kid," he said, straightening up. "Let's say I'm crazy enough to hear you out. You say you've built something. What is it?" The boy gave a small grin. "Not here. You'd never believe me on the street." "Then where?" "My lab." "You have a lab?" The boy nodded. Henry looked down at Lila. She was nodding too, eyes wide with the tiniest glint of hope. "Fine," he said at last. "Take us there." And just like that, the beggar boy turned and led them. Not to a hospital, not to a school, but into the heart of the unknown. Curiosity or desperation. Henry Grayson couldn't tell which one had made him follow the boy. Maybe it was the way Avi spoke. Calm, intelligent, fearless. Maybe it was the moment he saw a flicker of light return to Lila's eyes. Or maybe it was that deep, gnawing truth inside him that all his money, all his influence, had failed. So he pushed Lila's wheelchair through the narrow alleyways behind the market, puddles splashing with every turn. Avi led the way with that same stick, limping slightly, but fast and focused. They stopped in front of a crumbling building with rusted fire escapes and shattered windows. The kind of place Henry wouldn't walk into without security. But Avi motioned toward the ladder. "We're going up," he said. Henry looked up at the rusted metal ladder, then back at Lila. "How do you expect me to get her?" Before he could finish, Avi whistled sharply. Moments later, 2 boys emerged from the shadows. One carried an old mechanical pulley rig made from bike chains and discarded construction rope. They strapped Lila in gently, carefully. Avi gave instructions like a seasoned engineer. Not a single wasted word. The boys obeyed without question. When they reached the rooftop, Henry gasped. It wasn't a junkyard. It was a lab, assembled from the ruins of the city. A large tarp stretched across one end like a tent, weighed down by bricks and car parts. Underneath were dozens of contraptions, stacked motherboards, soldered wires, LED lights blinking softly. There were pages pinned to the wall, sketches of spines, nerve clusters, neural pathways, notes written in pencil and marker, formulas, diagrams. Abby stood proudly. "This is where I work." "You built all of this?" Henry asked, stunned. "Mostly from garbage," Abby said. "Scrapyards are full of gold if you know what to look for." Henry walked slowly, taking it in, the ingenuity, the discipline. It wasn't just impressive. It was borderline genius. Abby motioned toward a metallic brace on the table. It looked like an exoskeleton, made from bicycle tubes, leather straps, coiled wires, and a small screen mounted to the hip. "This is the walk frame," Abby explained. "It doesn't fix the spine. It tells the brain to try a different path. A detour." Henry frowned. "Explain." Abby pointed to a simple chart. "When the spinal cord is damaged, it's like a collapsed bridge. But the brain can learn to reroute signals, neuroplasticity. Muscles can be retrained. If we stimulate the right nerves with movement and pressure feedback, the brain starts firing in new ways." "You learned all this from reading through clinic windows?" Abby smiled. "That and a lot of library dumpsters." Henry picked up the walk frame carefully. "Does it even work?" "Tested it on myself." Before Henry could respond, Abby stepped into a second frame mounted on the wall. He strapped in with a few clicks. The device hissed softly. Then, he stood up straighter. His knees locked in place. He walked. Not perfectly, but smoothly. Then, he jumped. Landed. Henry's mouth fell open. How did you build this?" "I borrowed a phone once," Abby said. "Watched about 800 hours of surgical and robotics videos." Henry shook his head in disbelief. "You're not just a beggar." "I'm a boy no one gave a chance to," Abby said, unstrapping the frame. "But I believe everyone deserves a second shot, even if they can't pay for it." Lila, who had watched all this in stunned silence, whispered, "That was amazing." Abby turned to her. "It's your turn." Henry instinctively stepped forward. "Wait, is it safe?" "I would never risk her if it wasn't," Abby said firmly. "I've tested every wire, every joint, every battery. The system works." Henry stared at the strange device, the wind whistling softly across the rooftop. Then at his daughter, whose hands were gripping the armrest, not with fear, but excitement. He nodded. "Okay." Abby gently rolled the walk frame toward her and knelt down. "Let's make history," he said with a grin. Lila stared at the metallic frame beside her. She was nervous. You could see it in the way her fingers tightened around the teddy bear in her lap. The rain had stopped, but her breaths were shallow, shaky. And yet, her eyes weren't empty anymore. They sparkled with something fragile but fierce. Hope. Abby knelt in front of her with gentle, careful hands. Not like a technician, like a friend, like someone who understood what it meant to be fragile, but unbreakable. "Are you ready?" he asked. Lila bit her lip, then nodded. "Let's try." Henry stood a few feet back, arms crossed tightly, hiding his terror beneath a businessman's stoic face. His mind raced with 1,000 fears. What if she falls? What if it fails? What if this crushes her hope again? But he stayed quiet. Something told him not to interfere. Abby unstrapped the walk frame. "Okay, Lila," he said softly, "we're not fixing anything, because you're not broken. We're just rewiring, rerouting, reconnecting." He slid the exoskeleton around her legs, the soft leather hugging her thighs. The braces clicked into place, hugging her knees and ankles. Tiny motors whirred gently. A curved pulse monitor blinked green at her hip. "This isn't just about walking," Abby whispered, tightening the last strap. "This is about remembering your power." Lila nodded. Her hands trembled as she gripped the metal bars by her sides. Then, Abby pressed a button. A soft humming started. The frame adjusted slightly. Lila flinched, but stayed still. "Okay," Abby said calmly. "When you feel the vibration in your hip, shift your weight forward. Trust the frame. It'll guide you." Henry held his breath. The rooftop was silent except for the breeze. And then, her left foot moved. Slightly, just an inch forward. The foot scraped across the rooftop, guided by the gentle resistance of the frame. Her right foot followed. One step. Her first step. Henry gasped audibly. He didn't realize he was holding his breath until he almost choked on it. Lila's face lit up. Her eyes widened in disbelief. I'm doing it, she whispered. Don't stop, Avi said. One more. She shifted forward again. The walk frame adjusted to her motion. Step 2. Then another. And another. She wasn't walking smoothly. It was shaky, uneven, but she was walking. Across that rooftop, step by step, guided by science and stubborn belief, a 9-year-old girl defied the impossible. Halfway across the rooftop, Lila stopped. She turned back toward her father. Her cheeks were wet with tears, but her smile was radiant. Daddy, I'm walking. Henry stumbled forward. The man who had once built million-dollar deals without blinking was now weeping. Tears streamed freely down his cheeks as he covered his mouth with one hand, as if afraid to break the moment. He dropped to his knees. Baby girl, he choked out. You're walking. Lila beamed. I knew I could. I just needed help. Henry turned to Avi, who hadn't moved. The boy didn't cheer, didn't raise his fists. He just stood quietly, arms crossed, wind blowing through his matted hair, smiling gently. Told you, Avi said. That was it. No boast. No ego. Just quiet victory. Henry got up and walked over to him. You did what doctors, surgeons, scientists couldn't. Avi shrugged. I didn't fix her. She did that herself. I just built the bridge. Henry stared at him. You're a genius. Avi looked away. I'm just a boy who had to teach himself, because no one else would. There was silence for a moment. Lila turned in the frame, her laughter echoing across the rooftop. Not forced, not polite. Real laughter, pure, bubbly, alive. Henry looked at Avi again, truly looked at him. Not as a poor kid, not as a beggar, but as a young man who had just changed his daughter's life. And maybe, just maybe, the world. Henry couldn't sleep that night. Not from fear, but from awe. He kept replaying it. Lila taking her first step, her laugh cutting through the air like sunlight. Avi standing calmly as if he hadn't just rewritten what was medically impossible. By morning, Henry had already made calls. Not to lawyers, not to board members, but to everyone who had told him no. He wanted the world to see what he saw, because this wasn't a miracle. It was genius born from grit. By noon, the rooftop was packed. Doctors, scientists, engineers, professors, journalists from national news outlets. Even a few skeptics who'd called Henry's desperation pathetic. And then there was Lila, standing beside Avi, strapped into the walk frame, smiling, not because someone told her to, but because she believed in what was about to happen. Henry stood back and let them witness it for themselves. Avi didn't give a dramatic speech. He simply nodded to Lila, and she walked. Across that cracked, uneven rooftop, one step at a time, she walked. The silence broke like thunder. Cameras clicked, phones recorded, gasps filled the air. A few of the doctors who had once told Henry it was over stood frozen, jaws slack. And then Avi did something that shocked everyone even more. He stepped forward and explained. In perfect detail, using the rooftop chalkboard he had nailed to the bricks, he outlined how neuroplasticity works. How the walk frame used subtle pressure and timed movement to trick the brain into relearning. How every part, from the pulse reader to the feedback motors, was built from things most people threw away. He spoke like a seasoned engineer. He drew diagrams, quoted medical studies by name, and even cited innovations from MIT robotics research, studies most adults hadn't even read. He was 13, barefoot, and brilliant. The next day, headlines exploded across every major media outlet. Homeless boy builds walking device for paralyzed girl. Teenage genius defies medical odds. A mind from the streets that could change the world. Television crews swarmed the building. Offers poured in. Prestigious universities contacted Henry, asking about the boy with the homemade lab on a rooftop. But Avi wasn't interested in fame. Instead, he asked for one thing, a space to build more. With Henry's help, they founded Fix Forward, a nonprofit organization dedicated to creating affordable, open-source mobility devices for children with disabilities in underserved communities. Avi didn't just walk away from his old life. He pulled others forward with him. He returned to the very streets he used to beg on, not with a cup, but with a blueprint, teaching other kids how to rebuild bikes, chairs, even basic prosthetics from scrap. His rooftop lab became a full-blown innovation center, where street kids could invent instead of survive. And Henry? At first, he offered Avi a job at his tech company, VP of Research and Development. But halfway through the offer, he stopped. He looked at the boy, at the brilliance behind those calm eyes, and said something else instead. You don't work for me, Avi. I'll work with you. Years later, Lila stood on a stage at TEDx Youth, wearing a sleek, upgraded version of the walk frame, a model Avi built just for her, called Wings. She stood in front of a packed auditorium, lights shining on her, and began with a single sentence. I thought I'd never walk again, but a boy who slept on cardboard gave me wings. The crowd erupted in applause. She went on to tell the story, not just of the accident or the device, but of belief. How a boy no one believed in gave her back everything she thought she had lost. Not just her legs, but her strength, her laughter, her hope. Today, the name Avi is etched on scholarships, devices, and blueprints used in over 30 countries. But he still refuses to wear suits, still prefers barefoot brainstorming over boardrooms. And whenever anyone asks him, reporters, kids, doctors, how he did it, how he achieved the impossible, he always smiles and says the same thing. I didn't heal her legs. I healed her hope. Thanks for watching. Follow for more powerful stories.